Hello and welcome to the lecture for sections 1.6 to 1.8 in our textbook. So in this lecture I'm going to talk about both macroeconomic issues, as an example the budget deficits and the national debt, what those things mean. And I'll also talk about microeconomics, specifically supply and demand and what influences those two things and how it affects you as a consumer. I'll talk about types of competition and then a little bit about trends in the business environment. So the federal budget deficit occurs when the federal government spends more money than they take in. So the federal government spends money on things like our military, on our highway system, on benefits for people. You may have read in the news that the federal government has just launched a website where all Americans can get free COVID tests. Well, that's government spending. The government purchased those COVID tests from private companies. They paid money to have a website put up, and they'll pay money for postage to send all of those to any American that wants them. That's federal spending. That's just part of federal spending. Revenues, of course, are the taxes you pay, the taxes businesses pay, the tariffs and duties that companies pay to bring their products into this country. Those are all the revenues. And when the government spends more than it brings in, that creates a deficit. The national debt, which you might also have heard of, is the accumulation of all past deficits, and surpluses will reduce the national debt since the country started in 1776. So sometimes people fall into the fallacy of comparing the federal government's budget to a family budget. And people make the simplistic claim that, well, my family can't spend more money than we bring in, so how can the federal government? Well, the federal government is different in the sense that they can print money, and they can borrow money much easier than a family can borrow money. So it's a little bit different in that respect. The thing that is important to keep in mind is when the federal government borrows money, which the national debt is money that they borrowed from U.S. citizens and from foreign citizens, that's through treasury bills. When they borrow that, they have to pay interest on it. So that interest goes to people that have enough money to be able to lend the federal government money. So when that's the case, money flows to people that generally already have money, and that leaves less money in the budget to help people that don't have money. So it's a transfer of wealth that increases the inequality in society. So here's a graph. It's a couple of years old, but this shows when we had surpluses, which was just a few years in the late 90s during the tech boom, and when we've had budget deficits, which has been the majority of the time. Of course, in my lifetime, for sure, we've had deficits. So you can see the big drop or the big increase in deficit in the late about 2008, 2009, that was when we had our last recession. If this graph continued through 2021, you would see another big drop with the stimulus spending, helping the economy stay afloat during the pandemic. So a little bit about microeconomics. So microeconomics concerns the transactions that happen between a buyer and a seller. So all the decisions you make about what should I eat for lunch today, should I fill my car with gas or wait till tomorrow, I need a new pair of shoes, which ones do I buy, which university should I attend? All of those kinds of transactions occur between somebody offering those products and somebody wanting to buy those products. So the forces that impact that exchange of goods between a buyer and a seller are called demand and supply. So demand, as it shows here, is the willingness and ability of buyers to purchase goods and services at different prices. So if the price is higher, people are less willing to pay for it. If it's lower, more people are willing to pay for it. And supply is the willingness and ability of suppliers to provide goods and services at different prices. So if the price is too low, it's not worth it making the product, so businesses stop. They cease making that product. If the price is high and they can make that product and sell it profitably, then they'll do more of it. So that can be shown in a graphic like this. So the demand curve, and again, you'll study this more if you take Econ 201. So a demand curve shows the price of a product, in this case it's gasoline, along the y-axis, or the vertical axis, and the quantity that's purchased along the x-axis. So as the price is higher, people are willing to pay less. You can imagine if you have your car and gas went to $8 a gallon, you would probably seriously consider not driving your car and taking the bus instead, or riding a bike, or doing something other than buying gas. If gas went down to $2 a gallon, well, you might go buy a big car that gets terrible gas mileage because you find it comfortable, because it's cheap to buy gas. So the amount of a product that consumers are willing to buy is going to go down when the price is high and going to go up when the price is lower. And that's the net effect of millions of people making individual decisions. That's the collective impact of that. The supply curve goes in the opposite direction, as you would think. If the price is very low, in this case, it doesn't make sense for gas and oil companies to pump oil out of the ground and turn it into gas and deliver it to a local gas station. It's just not worth it, so they don't do it. They're not in business to do things at a loss. So when the price is low, there's less willingness to provide product. As the price goes up, it's more attractive, there's more willingness to do it. So where the demand curve and the supply curve intersect is called the equilibrium price. That's the price at which the market should settle in. And that's going to move over time because these curves are going to shift. They shift for a variety of reasons. So if your income went up, you would be able to afford higher prices for gas, so it would shift the demand curve to the right. If your preferences or taste, more people prefer taking long car trips versus flying in an airplane, that would increase it to the right. The price of substitute products can also affect it. So if all of a sudden bus fare and bicycles became very expensive, then buying gas would look good by comparison, and it would increase to the right. So those are different kinds of things that will shift the demand curve. What will shift the supply curve? Well, if there's new technological advances that lower the cost, maybe it's cheaper to pump oil out of the ground with some new technology that's invented. Now gas and oil companies would be willing to provide more at a lower price, so it would shift the supply curve to the right. Resource prices can have an effect. Other products that they compete against can have an effect. The number of suppliers and taxes can have an effect. So all of those things are happening simultaneously, and that equilibrium price is going to float around based on those impacts to it. So a little bit about competition. So pure competition, which is an ideal state from a consumer's perspective, meaning you're going to get the best deal, is typified by a large number of small companies. So nobody is dominating the market. The companies all sell very similar products with little differentiation between them. Okay, so one product is pretty much the same as another. Buyers and sellers both have good information upon which to make decisions, and it's relatively easy for new suppliers to enter the market. So some examples of that might be, well, I mentioned to you earlier that I have a friend that raises clams. He's a clam farmer. Well, the clam from one beach is pretty much the same as clam from another beach. There aren't any really big companies doing that. It's a bunch of small shellfish farmers that do it. And so it's a good market for buyers and for sellers. There's lots of competition there. A better market for buyers than it is for sellers, for sure. Another example on the other extreme is a pure monopoly. That's where there's one firm that occupies or dominates the entire market. So in that case, it could result from high barriers to entry. An example might be Puget Sound Energy. That's the only company in Olympia that you can buy electricity from. They have built electrical power plants, dams to generate electricity. They have run all the wires to everybody's houses and installed meters on their houses. So all of that makes it very, very difficult for someone else to start an energy company and offer you a choice. So if you own a home or an apartment in Olympia, your only choice is to buy power from Puget Sound Energy. That's a monopoly. So monopolies can also result from a patent. So one example of a patent is the drug Lipitor, which controls high cholesterol. The sales of that one drug in 1 year exceeded all the money that was spent on all sports and all entertainment. So it's a huge amount of money. Now, companies are granted patents to give them an incentive to invent something that didn't exist before. So that's why it's kind of an artificial monopoly in a way. So monopolies like that are highly regulated by the government to protect consumers. So as an example, Puget Sound Energy on their own can't decide to double the price of electricity. They would not be allowed to do that. So the government, they have to apply to the government board to say, we would like to raise our prices for this reason or that reason, and that government board would say yes or no. It's a utility commission would decide that. So we have government protections against consumers being harmed by monopolies. Now, in between those two endpoints is some areas in between. So one is monopolistic competition. That's where there's many firms on the market. The firms are close, but there is some differentiation, and it's relatively easy for new suppliers to enter the market. That might be an example of, say, running shoes or jackets or things like that, where there's a lot of different choices. If you wanted to buy a pair of running shoes, there's lots of different companies you could buy from, Nike or Adidas or Brooks or Asics or Reebok, lots of different companies to buy from. The products are close to each other, but there are some advantages of one over the other. There are differences in style and function that you might cause you to make a decision of one over the other. And it's not super hard to start up a company that's doing that kind of thing. So that's also a good market for customers. You have a lot of choice, and there's enough competition that keeps anybody from dominating and raising prices excessively. Another example is an oligopoly, hard to say. So that's where there are just a few firms that make up the entire market. So you have just a couple of choices. And those firms have a significant impact on one another. So they will usually copy each other in terms of new features. When one raises the price, the others will usually raise their price. An example of this would be cell phone manufacturers. There aren't a ton of companies that make cell phones. If you want a new cell phone, you have a couple of choices that you can buy from. So in that case, it's usually typified by very high barriers to entry. To start a company making cell phones would cost a lot of money, right? It would be difficult to do that. You can't just snap your fingers and do that. So in those kinds of markets, the government oversees antitrust activities. So they make sure that companies don't collude with one another to set prices or force other companies out of the market, or get a monopoly on all the resources that are used to make the product and kind of guard those. So that the government will step in to protect consumers in that case as well. So the last slide are trends in the business environment. So one change is the differences now in the demographics of the workforce. So the workforce is aging as our population is aging, and there's more people for a variety of reasons that continue to choose to work into their 60s and sometimes into their 70s. If you've gone into a McDonald's recently, you might see behind the counter somebody in their late 60s working next to somebody that's a teenager. So that represents a bit of a challenge and an opportunity for businesses. So the opportunity is they can tap into the wisdom that people have acquired over their life. The challenge is you have different employees that view the whole working situation differently and have different values potentially. The other change is diversity, which is a good thing for sure. So most people predict that by 2040 that we will be a majority minority country, meaning over 50% of the citizens in this country will be people of color. So that represents, again, challenges and opportunities. So in terms of language, in terms of culture, in terms of taste, all of that, businesses need to be aware of that. Global energy demands are increasing. That's going to only increase further if you think about a topic like electric cars. If in your lifetime the number or the percentage of electric cars increases dramatically, say by the time you're in your 40s, maybe half of the cars on the road are electric, well, that's going to create a large demand for generating electricity. Those cars all need to be plugged in at night and charged up. It also has a very negative impact on gas stations. If I owned 10 gas stations and that's how I made my living, I would be nervous about that because all of those new electric cars, of course, don't require gas. So what's going to happen to my business? So again, there are opportunities and there are challenges. One of the things that is increasing is the tendency for people to vote with their purchasing power. So to say, I support what this company is doing, I will buy from them. I don't support this other company and the policies that they have, the way they treat their workers, the way they treat the environment, whatever the case is, I will choose not to buy from that company, regardless of the price or the benefits of the product or anything. So people are tending to reward and punish companies for their behavior based on their purchases. So in terms of meeting competitive challenges, one of the trends is relationship management. Companies really want to have a close relationship with you so that when you think about their particular product category, you think of them first and you prefer them over anybody else because that you have this kind of relationship with them. If you know people that have iPhones, they would never consider having a different kind of phone because they have a relationship and it's part of their identity is that iPhone. There's also a trend towards strategic alliances, so businesses working together to kind of cooperate to succeed in the market. That's increasing as well. So that's the end of the lecture for this section. I look forward to talking to you when I lecture next about entrepreneurship. Thank you.